Hi, Gary Pease here from ESID Consulting, and I just want to continue with my critique of the BBC hit series called Line of Duty, which concerns a police anti-corruption unit tasked with investigating the highest levels of corruption within the police service. Now, this week's episode, or episode 4, I should say, touched on what happened to Mrs. Hastings, Superintendent Hastings' wife. In last week's episode, we were shown someone impersonating a police officer entering her property, and it turns out that she was subject to a paramilitary-style punishment beating, along the lines of what used to regularly happen in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. It turns out also, as a result of that beating, that she gave some information which disclosed to the investigating officers that Superintendent Hastings was actually under a huge deal of debt. And the implication being that because he was under debt, then he was also corrupt because of that debt. Now, this is where I think it's probably better to explain what vetting is. And the fact that someone, even though they're under a huge amount of debt, doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be corrupt or be corruptible. Mention was made that the level of debt will have come out during Superintendent Hastings' vetting process, which coincidentally or incidentally is what all police officers have to go through. And certainly when you get into the business of anti-corruption, anti-terrorism, so on and so forth, you are subject to a huge amount of really intrusive vetting. But the thing what a lot of people don't understand about vetting is it doesn't necessarily find everything. Some vetting will only find what you actually tell it, or what you actually tell the vetting officers about. And then other vetting, it really is in your best interest to tell the vetting officers, such as things like debt, affairs, skeletons in the closet. The whole point of vetting is that it's confidential for a start, and that if you tell the vetting officers what's going on, they can properly assess the risk. It doesn't mean to say you're not going to get the job. It just means they know what those risks are in the background. And because they know what the risks are, they can put the measures in place to prevent those risks from becoming threats to the organisation and to the individual. That's the whole point of vetting. So what we also talked about was, or saw, were the pressures that undercover officers in the police and other organisations are under, especially when they're under an investigation for a long period of time. And we saw this with DS John Corbett. And we saw his emotional state and how he was quite fragile and under a huge amount of stress, ostensibly because he didn't have a support network anymore. He was operating on his own because he'd gone above and beyond, and he didn't trust any of his senior colleagues. He was operating under his own volition. He wasn't being instructed by seniors. He wasn't getting the support and the backup that he should have been getting from the organisation. And this is where undercover operations generally can go wrong. It's when there is a lack of governance and a lack of control coming from the organisation at the top, and the undercover officer themselves feels as though they're very much on their own. And this is where he went wrong. He'd already overstepped the line earlier in the season, and we now know that he killed a number of police officers, and he was responsible for the beating of Superintendent Hastings' wife. We don't know why yet, but he was responsible for that. So there's some of the pressures that undercover officers are genuinely under from day in, day out. What also came about is a conversation that occurred between DS Corbett and DS Arnott from the anti-corruption team, who was tasked with arresting DS Corbett for the beating on the wife and for the previous killings. DS Arnott was given a lawful order in order to arrest DS Corbett. He took the decision and he refused to do so. After a lot of shouting and repeated orders, he did then backtrack on that, and he did arrest DS Arnott, or attempt to anyway. Guns were drawn, and with both officers pointing guns at each other, and DS Arnott was then given a lawful order by Superintendent Hastings to shoot DS Corbett. But this is a thing in certainly British policing. You may be ordered to shoot someone, but the person pulling the trigger, they are the ones who have to make that decision. It is their decision to decide whether it is a lawful order and whether it is a justifiable order. Because at the end of the day, if they shoot and kill someone, it could well be them standing in the dock under a murder charge. Now, DS Arnott refused to take the shot because he didn't believe that the order was given lawfully. In that, Superintendent Hastings was under a certain amount of duress and stress because he knew that it was DS Corbett who had given the beating to his wife. And on that basis, DS Arnott decided that it was not a lawful order. So he refused to take the shot. So that's it in a nutshell. That was episode 4, Line of Duty. Another really good series, a really good program. And I can't wait to see what happens in tonight's episode. If you've got any questions, if you'd like to talk more about anti-corruption and insider threat management, then by all means get in touch with me. Thanks very much.